A little boy sends a thank you card to a billionaire CEO for the child's support, highlighting a wonderful connection that brings joy to both parties. Finding it amusing, he orders his accountant to check just in case, only to be taken aback in disbelief at what he discovers and what it. Before we dive in, we'd love to hear from you. Let us know in the comments where you're tuning in from, and don't forget to give this video a thumbs up. Join us in supporting the channel, then sit back, relax, and enjoy the story ahead. Richard Grover's mornings embraced a precise routine, starting with black coffee as he eagerly skimmed through the latest market reports, explored international stock movements, took another look, and then joyfully enjoyed the little entertainment of his day as a fan. An intriguing blend of admiration, constructive feedback, and unique business ideas from individuals. Confident they had the next billion-dollar idea, most were quickly overlooked after a brief look. Some were shared with his PR team, and a select few brought a smile this morning. Clara handed him a small, slightly crumpled envelope with a handwritten address, showcasing a personal touch. Stationery without any company letterhead, resembling the delightful kind of letter a child might send to Santa if he had a corporate office. Manhattan. He turned it over, arching a brow. Something exciting and new for you, Clara? He casually slid it open, knowing you'd want to see it. A man who had experienced so much, yet as his eyes danced over the words, he couldn't help but let out a short, sharp laugh. Dear Mr. Grover, thank you. Thank you for the child's support. You might not realize it, but it really makes a difference. Mom thinks you wouldn't be happy about it, but I see it as a wonderful thing. I enjoy school, and the new sneakers are fantastic. Sincerely, Cameron O'Neill. Silence filled the sleek, glass-walled conference room where his executive team sat eagerly waiting to discuss exciting new opportunities. Matters. Richard held the letter up with a sense of joy, like a punchline to a joke only he understood. Well, this is an interesting twist. It seems there's a kid out there who believes I'm his secret benefactor. He shook his head with a smile, finding the creative scam attempt or misplaced gratitude quite entertaining. Chuckles danced around the table, but most of the team remained patiently unimpressed as Clara, ever efficient, tapped away. Her pen danced across her notepad as she prepared to draft a response that was both polite and firm, even though Richard mentioned it wasn't necessary. With a cheerful smirk, he folded the letter and set it aside, eagerly reaching for his coffee. I'm curious about how he got my name. If there's a kid out there believing I'm helping with his sneakers, maybe I should consider it. Begin requesting receipts that brought another chuckle, but Franklin the company's. The accountant shifted in his chair, eager for me to check just in case there's something exciting to discover. An unusual loophole in our payroll or charity spending. His tone was matter-of-fact but intriguing. There was a spark of curiosity behind his glasses as Richard waved a hand. Playfully, it's just a joke, Franklin, a kid's joke. Still, Franklin said, giving a gentle push. This chairback could be a great option, offering peace of mind. Richard thought about it for a moment, then smiled and said, sure, go for it. Enjoy the meeting. Progressed with financial reports, investment strategies, and a small PR challenge that we can overcome. A spirited junior executive and a rather unfortunate tweet by noon. Richard had nearly overlooked the letter completely when Franklin strolled back in, his usual calm demeanor as an accountant shining through. Paused at the doorway before stepping inside, one hand holding a folder. He didn't sit, didn't make eye contact, just cleared his throat. Richard, still reviewing documents, was quick. What did you discover? I've been quietly supporting a hidden lemonade venture, and Franklin didn't find it amusing, sir. There's something intriguing about the way it all unfolds. He mentioned that it caused Richard to set his papers down. He observed Franklin for a moment, noticing how his fingers tensed around the folder. Conversation Richard mentioned, his voice lowering with intrigue. Into the calm, expectant tone that usually made people nervous, Franklin exhaled. The kid, Cameron O'Neill, had potential. Indeed, there's a valid perspective here. After a thoughtful pause, Richard leaned back in his chair, his eyes sparkling with insight. Franklin eagerly opened the folder, flipping through the documents with anticipation. The meticulousness of a man who carefully considered everything before speaking truly impressed me. It took some time, but I successfully traced the audit for unaccounted transactions linked to any entity, even those that were only remotely connected to you. Discovered a series of small, consistent payments flowing into a trust fund he placed a highlighted report on the table. It's been active for nearly a decade, and the account it's linked to has a lot of potential, even if he hesitated. Richard picked up the report, scanning the information with a focused gaze. Vanessa O'Neill, he read aloud, a hint of determination in his voice. The name sparked a flicker of recognition in the back of his memory, something faint yet not completely lost. He looked up, curious about who it could be. Cameron O'Neill. Franklin paused for a moment, then thoughtfully responded, Vanessa. O'Neill's listed as the guardian. Her son Richard gazed at the paper with keen interest. Silence settled between them, the weight of the implication gently resting in the air. He set the report down, and the letter sat nearby, waiting for the right moment. Childlike handwriting stands out against his polished desk, and Clara walks in just in time to hear the last part. Raised a brow. You look like you've seen a ghost. Richard didn't answer right away. But there's always a chance for a surprising twist ahead. He tapped his fingers against the table once, twice, then let out a slow breath. Get me everything on Vanessa O'Neill, he said finally. Now. Richard flipped through the documents Franklin had placed in front of him, his grip filled with anticipation. As he continued reading, the name Vanessa O'Neill appeared in clear official print, and his thoughts began to swirl with possibilities. Arrived with a wave of delightful memories, ones he hadn't revisited in years, and he closed with a sense of calm. Franklin stood nearby as the folder was set down, accompanied by a slow, steady breath, shifting his weight with a hint of uncertainty, as if contemplating whether to speak up or await instructions. Clara, more composed, sat at the edge of his desk, with her arms crossed. She watched him intently. So, Richard began, said, keeping his tone steady, you're telling me I've been what? Discreetly. Financing this kid's life through some trust fund I don't even remember setting up. Franklin cleared his throat. Not. Absolutely. The funds are not coming from you directly. They are being channeled through an investment subsidiary that you own, which is quite exciting. He took a moment to think about the situation that unfolded around the same time you were with Vanessa O'Neill, and Richard was just gathering his thoughts before responding. He leaned back in his chair, tapping a finger against the folder, and I have a feeling this isn't just a coincidence, Franklin. He shook his head as I traced the transactions. The trust fund was created as part of a corporate philanthropy initiative, is one of those broad-scope funds designed to support community outreach programs. And a significant share of its disbursements over the years has been directed to a single recipient, Vanessa O'Neill. An account registered under her name, designated as a guardian fund. And considering that Cameron O'Neill is the only minor listed under her care, Richard let out a hopeful sigh through his nose. With an unreadable expression, Clara was the first to break the silence, bringing a spark of life to the moment. It's not yours, but it turns out you've been contributing to him without realizing it. That's the theory Franklin has confirmed legally speaking. There's a sense of freedom beyond the financial ties, and if the media were to catch wind of this, it could lead to unexpected opportunities. Pay attention to the details. And the story unfolds beautifully. Richard gently pinched the bridge of his nose and let out a quiet laugh. Even if it lacked humor, billionaire CEO quietly champions mystery child. Envisioning the exciting headlines, the buzz of speculation, and the countless interviews to come. Those insiders who suddenly claimed they had always known about his secret kid Clara, ever practical. Tilted her head. What do you want to do about it? Richard didn't answer right away. He was thinking. Reached for his coffee, took a sip, and smiled at the thought of a fresh brew ahead. His mind was already working. Exploring the angles, it became clear that there was just one exciting next step. I need to talk to Vanessa. Franklin shifted with a hint of anticipation as Richard glanced over. Absolutely, Vanessa O'Neill has moved on from her journalism career. A few years ago, she moved to a small town in Vermont and now owns a charming cafe. Hasn't worked for a major publication in years. Which might explain why this didn't receive attention before. Franklin took a moment to consider it, then added, and it looks like she might be enjoying her independence without a husband or partner. As far as I can tell, it's clear that she's been raising Cameron on her own, and Richard took that in thoughtfully. In the quiet moment, Clara, always quick on the uptake, nodded to herself with a sense of determination. It's time to go in. He frowned, but she said, I can make a phone call. You could too. I'm sure she would prefer to talk to you in person. When you show up, it creates an opportunity for a meaningful conversation that can lead to a better understanding. You have a great opportunity to uncover the complete story. Even though Richard wasn't entirely on board with the idea, flying out to a small town in Vermont to chat with an old flame about a trust fund he never knew existed sounds like an intriguing adventure on his list of ideal ways to spend his week. But he couldn't help but acknowledge that Clara had a. At that moment, he exhaled and shut the folder. All right, have the jet ready. I'll be on my way. Leave tomorrow. Clara nodded, already typing out arrangements on her phone. Franklin still appeared a bit uneasy, but he understood the importance of holding back. Richard sat calmly, back glancing at the crumpled letter from Cameron O'Neill one more time for the child support you will receive. He shook his head and said to himself, let's discover what lies ahead. The private jet gracefully landed at a quaint airport in Vermont the next afternoon. Richard stepped off the plane, feeling a mix of excitement and surprise at the colder weather than he anticipated. The air was crisp and invigorating. With a hint of pine in the air, he adjusted his coat, embracing the curious looks from. As he strolled through the small terminal, a sleek black car was already waiting for him, thoughtfully arranged by Clara with her signature touch. The driver, a middle-aged man with a thick New England accent, provided him with efficiency. A friendly nod as Richard settled into the back seat where Sir Richard welcomed him. He pulled out his phone, excitedly glancing at the address Franklin had discovered for Vanessa O'Neill's cafe. The driver let out a cheerful chuckle as he pulled onto the road, and everyone joined in the light-hearted moment. O'Neill's place has the best coffee in town. You're a friend of Vanessa Richards, right? The expression was calm and steady, and the drive into town was quick and filled with beautiful scenery. The charm of small towns shines through with their brick storefronts, a nostalgic main street, and friendly faces who clearly know each other. The car pulled up to a charming cafe on the corner, and the sign out front welcomed everyone with a warm invitation. Read O'Neill's place in neat, elegant script. Large windows revealed a welcoming glow, inviting interior. The kind of place that likely filled the air with the delightful aroma of fresh pastries and brewed coffee. Richard stepped out and squared his shoulders. He confidently faced boardrooms full of ambitious executives, successfully navigated billion-dollar deals, and managed international challenges with confidence. For some reason, walking through that door felt like stepping onto exciting new ground. He pushed it open, and the bell rang cheerfully. Above the door, the delightful chime welcomed the enchanting aroma of coffee and cinnamon that filled the air. Patrons glanced up, but their attention quickly drifted elsewhere. Then, from behind the counter, a voice, "Be right with you." And then she stepped into view. Vanessa O'Neill looked almost exactly as he remembered. If anything, it was even stronger, and her hair was shorter, pulled back in a loose ponytail, and there was a steadiness to her movements, a confidence that had blossomed since then. When they were both younger and navigating a world that was full of possibilities, she wiped her hands on. A dish towel is still waiting to see. What can I get you? Richard allowed the moment to linger for just a moment longer. How about some answers? Her hand paused gently as she lifted her gaze and met his, a spark of recognition brightening her face, followed by, with a careful touch, she placed the towel down and let out a gentle breath through her nose. Well, she said, her tone bright. That didn't take as long as I thought it would. Vanessa held his gaze for a long moment before shaking her head, more amused than surprised. She wiped her hands on her apron and leaned against the counter with a sense of ease, as if she had all the time in the world. Richard had seen this look before, so calm, measured with a hint of playfulness. He found himself torn between laughter and the urge to step back outside. How about some coffee? She asked Richard, crossing his arms. I want answers. She nodded, already reaching for a mug. That's what I believe. The cafe was filled with the delightful aroma of fresh bread and roasted espresso, creating a cozy atmosphere that beautifully contrasted with the sleek glass surroundings. The walls and marble floors of his usual environment created a serene atmosphere as the customers chatted quietly, with a few casting curious glances at Richard. Just a quick look. But that's all. No cameras, no journalists, and no security detail around. At his back was a cozy cafe that felt like it belonged to a wonderfully different universe than the one he lived in. Vanessa slid the coffee toward him and cheerfully motioned to a booth near the window. Might as well sit. You're not leaving until you've had a meaningful conversation. And I'm excited to have that discussion in a more personal setting. He paused for a moment, but there was no strong case to be made. With a hopeful sigh, he moved forward. He took the cup and followed her to the booth, settling onto the cushioned seat while she joined him across the table. He was not accustomed to waiting for explanations. He was used to people getting straight to the point. Point. Am I a parent? He asked. No point dancing around it. Vanessa nearly. She chuckled softly, shaking her head as she playfully replied, No. Richard, you do not. Having a kid brought an immediate sense of relief, but it was soon accompanied by a bit of irritation. So why does a 9-year-old believe I'm paying child support? She folded her arms and studied him for a moment before responding because, in a sense, you have been. He remained patient, anticipating her reaction. Continue, Cameron isn't mine either. She said finally, He's my nephew, my sister. Emily welcomed him into her life during a challenging time, and I offered my support whenever possible, but she was the one doing the real work. She was a single mom, and she gave it her all. She glanced down at her hands for a brief second before looking back at him. Richard remembered her fondly. She had passed away when he was 5. He remained quiet, unaware that Vanessa had a sister during their time together. Regardless of what they had been, their conversations had always remained light. I welcomed him in, she continued. I jumped right in, and while it had its challenges, I was determined to keep moving forward. My feat in raising a kid on a journalist's salary was a challenge. But she reached for her dreams with determination. After taking a sip of coffee and setting it down, I continued on. And then one day, I discovered that Emily had been receiving money through a trust fund. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough to help. She kept it to herself. It seems like she might not have fully grasped the source of it. It was just something that appeared as a lifeline when she needed it. After she passed, I explored it and discovered it was connected to a broader philanthropic effort that serendipitously aligns with a specific investment subsidiary owned by you. Richard exhaled, rubbing his fingers over his temple. So you made the choice to keep. Are you utilizing it? It wasn't precisely a decision, Richard. It was simply present, and it was. Supporting Cameron was important. He needed stability, and I was determined not to let my pride stand in the way. The way that the money wasn't stolen was completely legitimate. It was there, and it was. I'm excited to share that I used it, Richard. Let that sink in. It really made sense and was quite enlightening, in a way that is truly admirable. But it still doesn't clarify the letter. So, why does Cameron? It seems like it's child support. And Vanessa shook her head with a smile at Riley because he's a clever kid who figured things out and saw the bigger picture. He understood that I couldn't manage everything on my own. Discovered some old statements featuring your company's name, and in his 9-year-old mind, there was a clear and exciting explanation. There was a guy out there, happily supporting him. And in his words, it sounded like a child. Support. Richard exhaled through his nose, leaning back against the booth with a sense of ease. Here's a recap. I inadvertently supported a child's life through a trust that I had forgotten about, and his mother was unaware of its existence. Money was coming from. And now he thinks I'm his absentee father who owes him sneakers. Vanessa smirked. That about sums it up. It's impressive that Richard has navigated through corporate sabotage and multi-million-dollar lawsuits, market fluctuations, and ongoing media attention. Yet nothing in his professional life had set the stage for this moment. He ran a hand over his face, then lowered it, looking back at Vanessa and you with a sense of anticipation. She shrugged and said, I never thought to tell you. I didn't think it mattered, and you didn't know. It was established through a trust, which likely means you agreed to it years ago without a second thought. And, honestly, I was surprised by how much you seemed to care. The directness of it hit him more than he anticipated. Vanessa leaned forward, resting. Her arms rested on the table. Why are you here, Richard? She asked, and he stared at her for a moment. It took a little while before I could respond because the moment that letter arrived on my desk, she held his gaze, her expression a mystery, before softly letting out a quiet sound. Laugh. Well, that's a delightful surprise. He didn't argue, and a bell chimed in front of the cafe. A voice brightened the atmosphere, cutting through the hum of customers and the cheerful clinking of dishes. And Vanessa, I finished. The homework about the boy who stepped inside was filled with vibrant energy as he dropped his backpack by the door and tugging off his jacket as he made his way toward them. He paused with a smile when he saw Richard tilting his. He tilted his head slightly as he studied him, Richard had seen photos and Franklin's reports. It was a refreshing experience to see Cameron O'Neill in real life. The kid appeared curious and confident, excitedly assessing the situation as if he were pondering the possibilities. "Hey, kid," Richard said, not. Cameron narrowed his eyes, curious about why those were the first words out of his mouth. "Are you the guy from the message?" Vanessa let out a soft groan. "Cameron, what?" Cameron gracefully slid into the. She glanced at Richard with a bright smile and said, "You look just like that guy from the internet, the one with the helicopters." Richard raised a brow. "I have several helicopters." Cameron grinned, and cool Vanessa rolled her eyes. "How fun. Now he thinks you're Batman." Richard smirked. "You could do worse." Cameron glanced between them, then leaned in toward Vanessa in a loud whisper. "Are you guys going to fight?" Vanessa sighed, rubbing her temples. She thought how nice it would be to say no. Richard let out a soft, amused chuckle. This kid. It was something else. Cameron tapped his fingers against the table. "So do I owe? Are you here for money or something?" Richard shook his head, indicating no. "Kid, I believe I owe you an explanation." Cameron thought about that for a moment. Before nodding, "I'd love to grab a hot chocolate first. This sounds like an exciting journey ahead." Story Vanessa exhaled through her nose but cheerfully waved toward the counter to place her order. As Cameron hopped up and bounded toward the register, Richard leaned back against the booth, enjoying the moment. Before looking at Vanessa, "Smart kid," he said. "You have no idea." She muttered, and for the first time since he walked into this cafe, Richard had a strange feeling something told him this wasn't just a conversation, this was the start of something he hadn't planned for. Cameron returned with his hot chocolate, plopping back into the booth with the assurance of someone who had just secured a vital piece of. This conversation brought him joy as he took a long sip, sighing in satisfaction before setting it down, the mug down and leaning forward, hands clasped like a confident negotiator. Richard had faced high-stakes deals with men twice his age who didn't look half as prepared, so Cameron said, tilting his. "Hey, you're not my dad. But you helped me out with my things, which is a bit unusual, right?" "Think, Vanessa." Grown quietly, Cameron Richard raised a hand. "No, it's a fair point." He turned back to the kid with a smile, saying, "It's not like I was sitting in a big office somewhere, signing checks for your sneakers. The money comes from a trust fund I set up years ago. And I didn't even. It's great to see that it was still active until now." Cameron nodded as if he was taking notes in his head. "And it's interesting that you didn't know about me." "Not at all. Not until I received your letter." Richard admitted it, which by the way was quite interesting. "What a fantastic way to introduce yourself." Cameron grinned, clearly proud of his approach. "Absolutely. I had the same thought. I was going to draw a picture, but I realized that words might be even more effective. I almost considered asking for a car, but—" And Vanessa said no, and Richard smirked. "Smart woman." Vanessa exhaled sharply. "I really should have stopped him from sending that letter." Cameron shrugged. "You should have, but you didn't, so here we are." "We are." Richard couldn't help but laugh. The kid had a point, and the more. As he spoke, Richard began to notice the keen insight hidden beneath the light-hearted banner. Cameron wasn't just a curious child. He had pieced things together on his own and connected the dots with remarkable insight. Everyone anticipated that he would arrive at what he believed to be the most logical conclusion. It was completely wrong, but Richard couldn't help but appreciate the effort, so Cameron continued, "If you're not my dad, and it seems you weren't aware that you were covering my expenses. Does that mean you might consider stopping now?" Vanessa felt a surge of energy, but Richard responded before she had the chance. "No, I don't think I will." Cameron narrowed his eyes at. He was attempting to understand if Richard was truly serious, even though Richard wasn't completely on board, sure of himself. But there was something about this kid that made walking away feel like an unthinkable option because he said after a, "You reached out to me believing I had a role in your journey, and in a unique way. I may not be your dad, but I played a part in helping, even if it was by chance. Now that I know, I'm excited to embrace the truth." Cameron thought about that. "So, does that mean I get a car?" Vanessa groaned again, and Richard laughed. "You." He mentioned that achieving a responsible level of support means, for now, no car. Cameron let out a big sigh. "But I'm definitely holding on to the sneakers." The conversation flowed effortlessly, feeling both easy and wonderfully natural, as if they had known each other for more than just a single afternoon. Richard had never spent much time around kids, but Cameron was different. He felt like any kid, sharp and funny, with a cleverness that was truly remarkable. Good, and even though he had just met him, Richard felt a wonderful sense that this wasn't the last time they would talk. Eventually, Vanessa checked the time and gently nudged Cameron about his homework. Cameron let out a groan. But there's always a chance for a productive session ahead. He grabbed his backpack and stepped out of the booth, a smile on his face. This was fun, he said. We should do it again sometime. Richard watched him go, then turned back to Vanessa. He's a good kid, she smiled. Just a little. Yeah, he is. Richard tapped his fingers against the table. He doesn't. He may appear a bit uncertain, but Vanessa mentioned that I made it clear. Absolutely. Richard nodded, and she smiled, recognizing the great work he had done as she took a moment to appreciate him. I'm really curious about what you're doing here, Richard. Are you just exploring? Are you genuinely looking to be a part of his life? Richard found himself without an answer at that moment. At least not when he was prepared to express that he wasn't sure yet. He acknowledged, but I'd like to figure it out. Vanessa studied him, then finally gave a small nod. All right. It was as close to an invitation since he was going to receive it a week later. Richard's name was everywhere. The internet began with a single overheard conversation between two kids at school. Heard Cameron mention Richard's name, and by the time lunch was over, it had taken off. By the next day, half the school was buzzing about it. Was sure that Cameron's long-lost billionaire father had finally arrived to claim him, as someone's older brother shared about it online. A local news blog picked it up, and from there, it blossomed like. Richard woke up to headlines that were beyond his wildest dreams. Billionaire status. CEO quietly champions the mystery child, the long-lost son of Richard Grover. Who is the secret heir? A small-town boy asserts that CEO is his father, while Grover faces a scandal. Could this be a surprising revelation? Family. Richard sighed, tossing his phone onto his desk. He had anticipated some. There might be some aftermath from the visit, but this was quite amusing. Clara walked in with her phone already ready. I've got some news to share, so let's dive in. We'll start with the not-so-great news first, and then we can move on to the brighter side. It's the hottest topic right now, with every tabloid covering it and the paparazzi eagerly capturing the excitement. Let's find Vanessa and Cameron. It's just a matter of time before someone visits her cafe. Richard has a plan in motion. Of his nose, and the good news, she smirked. Stock prices went up, and people are loving it. A wonderful father-son story. He shot her a look, but she just shrugged. Richard exhaled, noting that not everyone views this as a scandal. This wasn't what he expected. He was hopeful that Vanessa had made it clear she wanted to keep Cameron's life stable, and due to a little mix-up, they were on the verge of having cameras pointed at them. And he eagerly grabbed his phone to scroll through it. Amidst the jumble of articles, let's find Vanessa's number. Clara remained unfazed. Richard has already opened your email. And as soon as he dialed, the call connected almost instantly. Before it was picked up, fix this. Vanessa snapped. Richard sighed. I'm working on it. Let's pick up the pace. In the background, a muffled noise emerged, followed by Cameron's voice. Are we famous now? Vanessa groaned. Richard, I promise I believe in handling this, and I promise I'm coming back. Silence. Then a reluctant agreement. But make sure you have a plan, Richard. It's all about moving forward. However, he felt a strong sense that he would see this through to completion. This wasn't just a media issue. It became personal. Now, Richard has returned to Vermont. Sooner than he expected, the media attention had calmed down a bit. But there was still room for improvement for Vanessa's liking. Frustrated when he showed up at the cafe again, but he came prepared, having pulled enough strings to ensure a positive outcome. Reporters would approach them, and that could have been the conclusion of it all. He had fulfilled his role, but then Cameron extended an invitation for him to sit down. Down again, and suddenly Richard discovered he was staying a little longer at first. He reminded himself that he was simply ensuring everything stayed on track. He'd arrive, check in, and then leave. But each time he visited, it became more challenging to persuade himself that he wasn't finding joy in it. Cameron asked endlessly. Inquiries about his career, the business he's involved in, and the fascinating mechanics of how a helicopter operates. Richard answered most of them, skillfully navigating the ones he wasn't quite prepared for. Vanessa always watching from the background. She felt a mix of amusement and caution. While she had her doubts about the longevity of this situation, there was still a glimmer of hope. He continued to return, week after week, and then month after month, with the intention of taking charge. The media storm transformed into a new chapter, and he began to notice the beauty around him. He hadn't noticed before how Cameron always took an extra second to laugh at his own jokes, as if he was making sure everyone was ready to join in the fun. It was impressive how Vanessa dedicated herself so fully, pushing through even when she was tired. Long days at the cafe, with their simple life, radiated a warmth that was truly special. Clara, ever perceptive, didn't let it slide. "You do realize you're getting attached, right?" she said one afternoon, watching as he stared at his calendar, contemplating whether to plan another trip. Richard chuckled. "I'm just ensuring everything is in order. Everything is going smoothly, and that's why you've been enjoying your trips to Vermont every other weekend. It seems you're thinking about a summer home there." He chose not to argue, as Clara had a wonderful way of seeing things just as they were. The next trip felt like any other. He walked into the cafe with excitement, expecting to see Vanessa behind the counter, but instead he discovered a teenage girl wrapping up her tasks, appearing a bit anxious when she noticed him. "Cameron's, oh." My friend Richard looked a bit puzzled. Where could he be? Vanessa's expression changed, and Richard felt a knot in his stomach before she even said a word. She was at the hospital, and there was hope for a positive outcome. Suddenly, an aneurysm occurred, and everything after that felt like a blur. By the time he reached the hospital, it was a moment that felt heavy. He wasn't family, and no one had reached out to him. It was a challenging situation, but there's always hope for connection and understanding in the future. He thought about telling him, but then he walked into town and heard it for himself. He stood in the hallway, surrounded by doctors and nurses bustling about. Surrounded by new possibilities, Cameron found himself at a crossroads, filled with excitement about what to do next. Sat in a chair against the wall, gazing at the floor, feeling a calm stillness all around. Quiet Richard knelt in front of him, filled with anticipation about what he was supposed to say to Cameron. "She's gone." The words felt flat and simple, yet Richard's chest tightened with a mix of emotions. He had always been great at fixing things and solving problems before they spiraled. But this time it felt different. Here's a solution. It's all about a 9-year-old kid whose world had been. Cameron's hands were tightly clenched into fists, and his voice was strong. "Shake." But his shoulders did. She mentioned she wasn't even feeling bad this morning. Richard reached out, took a moment, then placed a hand on his shoulder. "I know it." It was all he could think to say. The funeral may have been small, but the entire town came together. Up because naturally they did. Vanessa had created a life here, one brimming with people who knew her and saw her every day, truly understood the wonderful person she was. Richard sat near the back, listening to stories about a woman. He discovered he had barely known her. She had been so much more than just the sharp-witted individual he once perceived. He recalled more than just the woman who operated a cafe and nurtured a boy who wasn't her own. She had created something truly meaningful. Cameron sat in the front row, finally grasping something he had never truly understood before. Silent and unmoving, he didn't cry. Richard felt uncertain if that was a positive sign, whether it was a thing or not. Afterward, there were many questions, and the journey to find answers was just beginning. People eagerly speculated about what exciting developments might unfold next regarding guardianship and Cameron's situation. The next morning, a social worker approached him with kindness and gentleness. She explained things in a way that aimed to simplify the process, highlighting that there are options available. "We'll start," she said with a sense of assurance, "by exploring the possibility of any extended family members being able to take him in." Richard had already confirmed that there weren't any options available. The woman paused, flipping through her files, hopeful that someone will step forward, be placed with a foster family. Richard had experienced many things in his life. People who lost everything, people who clawed their way up from nothing. He had seen kids go through the system and come out the other side, changed, some worse, some better, but he looked at Cameron at kids hadn't really spoken since the funeral, and there was a weight inside him that felt more significant than it needed to be. The social worker spoke again, this time with a softer tone, suggesting that if he wanted to explore the possibility of guardianship, we could certainly do that. Explore that as well. Richard was uncertain about what he should say next, and then Cameron, who had been sitting quietly beside him, reached out in a calm and gentle manner. With intention, a gentle gesture, a hand holding his sleeve. His voice was, "It's quiet, almost too quiet. Can I join you, Richard?" He had negotiated billion-dollar deals with a sense of excitement that filled him in that moment, especially when he looked down and saw Cameron. Seeing him for the first time in days, not just glancing past everything but truly looking, he realized the decision had. This has already been established. It wasn't focused on business or responsibility. It was about a boy who had just experienced a loss, exploring the world of optics and the logical connections that emerged from it. Everything. Richard let out a slow breath and turned back to the social worker with a sense of hopefulness. What steps can we take to bring this to fruition? Richard had only begun to consider the possibilities after deciding to take Cameron with him. Paperwork, the legalities, the logistics, these were merely tasks to tackle, hurdles to overcome. He had achieved so much more, challenging moments in his career with ease. But as the private jet touched down in New York and he glanced over at the small quiet boy sitting across from him, made him realize that this was more than just another problem to solve. Cameron. He had spent the flight in quiet contemplation, curled up in his seat and gazing out the window, immersed in his thoughts. Richard. I couldn't begin to guess at it. It was a different kind of quiet, filled with a sense of possibility rather than sulking. No stubborn defiance, just a quiet response when spoken to, yet he remained unyielding. Initiate conversation, and when they finally stepped off the jet and into the waiting car, he embraced the moment with a calm demeanor. He gazed at the skyline and the flashing lights of the city, just like any typical 9-year-old would, sitting there with his backpack in hand, ready for whatever adventure awaited him, snugly in his lap, resembling a child who was on the brink of discovering a new place to belong by the time they arrived at. Richard's penthouse was a serene place, and as the elevator ascended, the quiet atmosphere felt almost peaceful. Doors slid open, and Cameron stepped out, taking in his new home with a sense of wonder. The place was sleek and modern, luxurious, the kind of apartment that graced magazine covers from floor to ceiling. Windows framed the city beautifully, with everything thoughtfully arranged and every detail perfectly in harmony. Cameron took a leisurely lap around the open-concept living room, pausing near a stunning marble kitchen island before turning to Richard. Your house has such a welcoming vibe, almost like a hotel. Richard set his keys down. Is that a? Cameron just shrugged, leaving it open to interpretation. As the butler Robert stepped in from the hallway, he was an older man with a sharp posture and a constant sense of efficiency. I will prepare a room for Master O'Neill. Cameron's eyes widened. Master O'Neill turned to Richard. Do I own a castle now? Robert, without missing a beat, nodded at the well-maintained surroundings. Residence is a modern castle. Young Sir Cameron squinted at him. Are you a robot? Richard pinched the bridge of his nose, sensing a headache beginning to form. Robert is not a robot. Cameron crossed his arms. Crossed, Robert remarked. That's exactly what a guy with a robot butler would say. Unfazed, he gestured toward the hallway. Your room is ready, sir. Shall I show you? You. Cameron paused for a brief moment, then nodded enthusiastically and followed him down the hall. Richard released a relieved breath. Watching them go, I knew this was the start of an exciting adjustment. The next few days showed just how much there was to embrace. Neither of them had any idea what they were doing, but that's part of the adventure. Cameron wasn't a fan of New York, but there's always something new to discover. The noise, the crowds, the way people moved with such energy, often forgetting to greet one another. He had mixed feelings about the apartment. It felt so pristine, almost as if it were untouched, and he hesitated to interact with most of it. The food was not quite what one would expect from the high-end groceries stocked in the fridge, but Richard was ready to learn how to make something delicious. He attempted to tackle the issue by throwing money at it, a strategy that had always proven effective in business. With just a few phone calls, he was optimistic about finding a solution. Cameron's new room was filled with an incredible array of items, including game consoles and toys, making it a dream space for any kid. An incredible collection of Legos, a gigantic beanbag chair, and a basketball hoop. Cameron walked in, took one look, and then turned to Richard, asking, Where are the pancakes? Richard blinked with surprise as Cameron happily shoved his hands into his hoodie pockets. Vanessa always made pancakes when I was feeling down, and you surprised me with an entire toy store. But you didn't consider pancakes. Richard stood there, completely surprised. had spent his life fixing problems with efficiency, and yet here was a 9-year-old inspiring him to see new possibilities. It was the most obvious thing in the world. Before he could figure out how to respond, Clara strolled in with her arms crossed, and he knew she was right. Understand that he can't simply buy his way out of this, Richard exhaled. All right. Let's move forward and find a solution. Pancakes. Clara raised a brow, excited. Oh, we're making pancakes. He frowned, but she smiled and said, We are. Smirked. You don't know how to make them, do you? Richard scoffed. It's pancakes. How exciting. It was quite a challenge, but Clara provided great supervision as Richard made his attempts. Cook, which resulted in 3 burnt pancakes, one that somehow stuck to the ceiling, and one that looked more like a creative masterpiece. Deflated sponge than food. Cameron, sitting on the counter, found the whole thing hilarious. You run an empire, but you can't flip a pancake, he playfully teased Richard, holding the spatula with a grin. Side, you want to try? Cameron nodded, hopping down with careful precision. He poured batter onto the pan and waited, then with a small flick of the wrist, he flipped it perfectly. Richard narrowed his eyes. Why? Did you learn that, Vanessa? The name lingered in the air between them, filled with potential. Just a moment before Cameron settled at the counter, he poured syrup over his pancake and took a delightful bite. He chewed thoughtfully and then looked around. Richard, you're making progress. And I appreciate your effort. Clara, keep up the good work. Leaned against the fridge, arms crossed, noticing progress. Richard didn't say anything, but something about the moment settled differently in his chest. The next few weeks were a continuous journey of trial and mornings were a challenge. But Cameron was determined to make the most of them, even if waking up early and school drop-offs were tough. It was quite the adventure as Richard's driver tackled the morning traffic, with a spirited 9-year-old in the backseat adding to the lively atmosphere, sharing thoughts on math dinners, which varied in experience. Some nights they enjoyed ordering in. On other nights, Richard tried his hand at cooking, often with Clara swooping in just before anything went awry. But gradually, something wonderful began to happen. Cameron started to open up more, sharing not only his thoughts about Vanessa, but also his passion for his favorite books. Unique facts he enjoyed gathering, and how he once triumphed in a school contest by creating a model volcano with real lava effects. He began venturing out of his room more, exploring the apartment, leaving sneakers in the hallway and toys in various spots. Richard discovered himself adapting in ways he had never anticipated, and he embraced the learning process. Cameron liked to sleep with the doors slightly open, not out of fear, but because it created a welcoming atmosphere. He discovered that Cameron enjoyed apple juice, which made him feel a little less lonely, even though orange juice wasn't his favorite, and that he really disliked when people interrupted him while he was reading. One night while sitting on the couch, Cameron spoke up unexpectedly. Are you going to keep me? Richard, taken by surprise, turned to look at him. What? Cameron didn't meet his gaze. Is it forever, or am I just here? For now, Richard has dedicated his life to making thoughtful decisions. And this, it was clear and straightforward, and he confidently said, I'm keeping you. Cameron paused for a moment, then nodded with a sense of agreement, and just like that, something had changed. And Richard found himself uncertain about his role as a guardian and father. Find a solution that works, but this time it didn't quite happen. This was his life now. Richard never envisioned himself in a parental role. In the early years, he believed that raising Cameron was a challenge he would master in due time, as if fatherhood could be approached like a business strategy. Yet time had a way of gently guiding even the most determined. Assumptions eventually led to the realization that it wasn't something he was figuring out. It was just life. Cameron grew up quickly, just like many kids do. One day, he was the small boy who still needed a step stool to reach the kitchen cabinets. The next, he was closing doors with a bit of flair and expressing his feelings about how he feels misunderstood. Richard barely noticed the change before it fully unfolded. Middle school had its challenges. Cameron wasn't a bad kid. In fact, he was smart, even sharper than Richard had ever been at that age. And he was also expressing his unique personality with a touch of sarcasm and forming his own opinions about everything, which is quite an exciting journey. Wearing a suit to the gala, Cameron had said with a playful pout when he was 12, arms crossed. You don't have to like those things if you don't want to, Richard had replied. You just have to stand there, shake a few hands, and embrace the moment. That's a challenging life lesson, Richard said with a thoughtful expression, rubbing his temple. Then call it an introduction to how the world works. Cameron gave him a look that was surprisingly skeptical for a kid, but that's just part of the journey. Have you ever thought about how I feel about being part of this world? Richard had no response to that, and Cameron was always seeking his own path, and as the years went by, he became even more resolute in stepping out of Richard's shadow, embraced challenges, and chose the path less traveled, even when opportunities were readily available. At 16, he proudly secured his first job at a bookstore, even though Richard mentioned he had access to more money than he could ever need. That's your money, Cameron had shot back, not mine. Richard had gazed at him for a long moment before, with a hopeful smile, toss him the keys to the town car and suggest that Henry take the wheel. Cameron had rolled his eyes. I'll take the subway like everyone else. Richard had muttered something under his breath about ungrateful teenagers. But deep down he felt a sense of pride that the media still. It has been such a joy to see the billionaire adopt the mystery boy story, bringing entertainment for years, and every moment is filled with excitement. Every now and then, someone would enthusiastically attempt to bring it back to life. Pondering the bright possibilities of Cameron's future and what Richard had in store, there were exciting possibilities ahead for him. Regardless of whether he'd inherit the empire, Richard embraced his own path a long time ago. It wasn't about the headlines, the business, or anyone else's opinions. Anticipated, it was about Cameron. He was present for every scraped knee, every school play where Cameron enthusiastically stood his ground, ensuring Richard didn't donate anything to the theater department while he was there. For the nights when Cameron had nightmares but kept it to himself, quietly wandering into the kitchen for a glass of water at 3 o'clock in the morning, subtly seeking reassurance. And then came Cameron's first heartbreak. Can be tough, but Richard was doing his best to navigate through it, even if it felt a bit awkward at times. He was trying to put on a brave face despite the challenges. There's never been a moment quite like this, especially when a girl named Lily decided she just wanted to be friends. Cameron sat on the couch with arms folded, looking thoughtfully into the distance. She said I was too nice, he muttered. What does that even mean? Richard sat across from him, leaning back with his own glass of whiskey, savoring the feeling that this was one of those moments. Means she has unique taste. Cameron chuckled, but the skull remained visible. She had a fondness for Ethan Riley, even though he wore sunglasses indoors. Richard took his time, with a sip of his drink. It felt like a playful rebellion against the world, and Cameron's lips twitched with a hint of amusement. He didn't smile, but it was almost there. Richard always had a unique way of expressing himself. Cameron didn't always know what he needed to hear, but he was there, and sometimes that was enough. Years passed, and the kid who once called Robert a robot was suddenly standing at his high school graduation, shaking hands that felt taller than Richard ever imagined. He was talking about college is all about doing things his way, ensuring that no one could ever doubt that he earned everything he has. Richard is determined to make his mark. Watch him grow, and with each passing year, the life he had built blossomed from a single unexpected letter. Felt less like an accident and more like the only thing that had ever made since one Christmas when Cameron was nearly grown. Richard Slee. D.A. wrapped package across the table. Cameron raised an eyebrow. If this is another exciting surprise. It's a pricey gift. Just a friendly reminder that I'm not exactly a wealthy kid, Richard said with a playful smirk. Just go ahead and open it. Cameron rolled his eyes but eagerly tore into the paper when he saw what was inside. His fingers stilled as it was the letter. This letter, the one he had written years ago, expressing gratitude to Richard for the child's support, was a delightful surprise as he hadn't realized he was contributing to it. Was framed. And now the edges are slightly yellowed with age, preserved behind glass like something truly special. Cameron let out a soft chuckle. This is quite a moment. Richard watched him, an expression full of possibilities. You have no idea how. That letter truly transformed my life. Cameron was silent for a while, thoughtfully tracing. He traced the edges of the frame with his thumb, his face a mystery, and then he looked up. Yeah, he said, his voice softer now. I do. He set the frame down with care and pulled Richard into a hug, not a quick obligatory one, but a genuine embrace, the kind that Richard, for once, found himself without words, and in that moment, he realized something profound. In that moment, Richard experienced something profound. Although he had never been adept at expressing his feelings, there were times when emotions truly resonated within him. Swelling up quickly to embrace one of those moments that occurred on a warm afternoon near the end of Cameron's. During his senior year in college, he sat in a folding chair on a campus lawn, eagerly watching Cameron march up to the stage. In his cap and gown, posture straight and confident, cameras flashed around them. Families cheered as Richard maintained his composure, clapping politely, while inside, he felt a sense of pride twisting around in his chest when Cameron accepted his diploma. There was a bright spark in his eyes that Richard acknowledged from all those moments when Cameron chose to embrace the challenging route. There was a young man who had forged his own way, and it reminded Richard of the incredible journey of change since the day he first brought Cameron to New York, back when Cameron was a hopeful kid who dreamed of pancakes and cherished memories of Van. More than words could express. That day felt both distant and wonderfully near, as if time had collapsed into the moment Cameron turned and lifted his diploma, a bright smile lighting up his face. After the ceremony, the atmosphere was filled with excitement as crowds jostled around them, and parents embraced their loved ones. Children graduates captured countless memories and photos, while friends filled yearbooks with heartfelt promises to stay connected. Richard found Cameron near a large oak tree behind the auditorium, where Cameron was happily standing with a small group of friends were sharing a joyful moment, laughing about something, maybe an inside joke, when Cameron spotted him and politely excused himself. He walked over, adjusting the tassel on his cap, and Richard felt a delightful urge to clap for him on the back and say something meaningful, but Cameron beat him to it. "You made it," he said, sounding pleased and perhaps a bit proud. With a hint of surprise, Richard tilted his head and shrugged. "I said I'd be here." Cameron set his hand on the edge of his cap, pushing it back slightly. "Sometimes, your work schedule might suggest something different. I appreciate you being here." Richard tucked his hands into his pockets, and, as I admired Cameron's stunning black gown, I couldn't help but notice the excitement in the air. He caught the eye of his friends, who were joyfully waving at him. Cameron gave them a quick nod and then turned back to Richard. "Can we talk later? I have something important I want to share with you." Richard agreed, not pressing for details, knowing that Cameron had truly earned the moment. He had the freedom to manage things as he pleased, and they reunited later in a more peaceful setting. Cameron had changed out of his graduation robes and wore simple jeans and a collared shirt, looking more like himself. The kid who once rummaged through the refrigerator late at night had grown taller, radiating a quiet confidence. Richard admired as Cameron pulled a folded paper from his jacket pocket and held it up with a sense of anticipation. "I've been working on this," he said, as Richard unfolded it, his brow creasing with anticipation. He scanned the text. It was a proposal of sorts, a plan for a nonprofit, an organization inspired by Vanessa O'Neill, committed to offering valuable resources for single mothers and orphan children. Cameron had typed it thoughtfully, including mission statements, goals, and a roadmap for how to grow the foundation moving forward. In the next few years, Richard took a moment of silence, thoughtfully tracing a finger across the page, noticing the lines of text that highlighted mentorship programs, small housing grants, and educational support. "You've been busy," he murmured, handing it back. Cameron nodded, "And I've seen what a little help can make a big difference." Vanessa faced many challenges before discovering that trust fund. She'd had a group like this. Perhaps her journey would have taken a different turn. "While I can't go back and change the past, I can at least make the future brighter for other people in similar situations." He smiled, but his eyes sparkled with, "I am filled with determination to pursue this just as she would have, building it from the ground up." Shortcuts. Richard felt that familiar squeeze in his chest. He offered a measured nod. "I can fund this. Let's make a few calls. Could bring donors lined up next week." Cameron said with enthusiasm, "I appreciate it. It's just not the way I envisioned this." Richard should have seen that coming. Cameron always chose the challenging path, driven by good intentions. "So, how will you tackle it now?" Cameron carefully tucked the paper back into his jacket, taking it step by step. "I have some grants. I've arranged to take a modest salary from the foundation, just enough to cover my living expenses, and I'm excited to continue working part-time if necessary, especially with the great connections I've made from my internships. It may not be huge at first, but will definitely grow." There was that spark in Cameron's expression, the one that said he had a plan and nobody could talk him out of it. Richard felt a wave of pride remembering the little boy who had once passionately argued about wearing suits to fancy galas. The man standing in front of him was thoughtful and principled in a way that truly stood out among others. They continued discussing the details with enthusiasm, and Cameron inquired if Richard would be able to review the financial breakdown. It would be great to share some insights on the sustainable fundraising that Cameron discussed. The help he sought was not financial but rather guidance, which brought to mind how he had once taught Cameron basic math when Cameron was still in elementary school. Time moved on, and Cameron launched the Vanessa O'Neill Foundation with a small yet meaningful celebration. There were no grand press conferences. Cameron chose to engage with the local community instead of getting caught up in the media circus. Center engaging with a wonderful audience of mothers, educators, and local supporters. Richard stood quietly at the edge of the room, watching Cameron speak about hope and the significance of having someone by your side. Cameron once mentioned Vanessa by name, highlighting how much he believes in you. Her compassion and resilience inspired him every day. Richard felt a sense of determination in his throat. He remembered a conversation with Vanessa in her cafe, a time when neither of them realized how profoundly it would resonate. Their lives would beautifully intertwine a few months later as Richard found himself back in Vermont, where Cameron had decided to revitalize Vanessa's charming old cafe to serve as the foundation's local office and a vibrant community meeting space. Let's put up the sign. The front still read O'Neill's Place, and with a fresh coat of paint inside, the walls were partially reworked to enhance the charm. There's a great opportunity for desk space and storage rooms. While the front counter continues to be managed by Cameron, it was emphasized that preserving the essence of the cafe is vital for nostalgia and for providing delightful coffee or snacks to visitors on a late afternoon after the renovations were almost complete. Richard and Cameron sat together on the porch outside the building. The chairs were old and slightly creaky, but they held a certain charm. The same comforting feel they always had as the sun dipped below the rooftops, casting a warm light across the porch end. The nearby street buzzed with a delightful rhythm as the town moved at its usual unhurried pace. People walking with shopping bags and kids on bikes passed by, greeting each other as Cameron sat down a pile of paperwork on a small side table and leaned back, stretching his arms over his head. He let out a cheerful, with a contented breath. He gazed at the sign that still bore his aunt's name. I didn't think I'd end up here, he admitted, reflecting on the journey that brought him back. Vermont is running a place with her name on it, and it feels just right. As Richard sipped the coffee Cameron had brewed filled the cool air with its rich scent. It suits you, he said, admiring Cameron's shirt. The cuffs were rolled up, and a small smudge of paint adorned his forearm from a last-minute touch-up inside the cafe. He had accomplished nearly everything on his own or with the support of a few close friends. It took some time, but Cameron was determined to celebrate Vanessa's memory with his own hands, not contractors or corporate teams. There was a brief pause in their conversation turned into a comfortable silence as they enjoyed the sight of a couple walking their dog across the street. Cameron shifted in his chair and turned to Richard with a hopeful expression. Can I ask you something? Richard set his coffee down. Of course. Cameron paused, glancing at the chipped paint on the railing. Before he spoke, do you regret taking me in all those years ago? His tone was bright, calm yet hopeful, as if anticipating an answer that could bring unexpected joy. Richard felt a stir of emotion, something that brought to mind how his life once felt so solitary, controlled, and carefully managed. Then he thought about all the experiences since those late nights assisting Cameron with homework. The first heartbreak and the moments shared with Cameron have been truly memorable. He was determined not to let him cover any expenses beyond what was essential, cherishing both the proud moments and the challenging ones. He expressed a gentle sound that could have been a laugh, radiating warmth rather than mere amusement. It was the best investment I ever made. Cameron couldn't help but smile, shaking his head. That's such a delightful way of putting it. Glanced down at the porch where the wood slats had a charming character from years of wear, and it brings so much joy to hear. Richard leaned back in his chair, resting his arms on the worn surface, feeling comfortable and at ease. It's true that at first I viewed the armrest as something to manage, but that shifted faster than I expected. Thought Cameron's gaze flicked back to Richard. and there was a warm sense of gratitude in the way he inclined his. They fell quiet again, the hum of the town continuing on, with a car rolling by. A woman cheerfully called out to a neighbor as the delightful aroma of freshly baked bread wafted from a nearby bakery. Richard took another sip, savoring the moment. The moment with coffee felt like a new beginning, as if a chapter was gracefully closing, and Cameron was ready to embrace what comes next. The boy in that thank you letter has grown into a man, full of his own exciting plans and aspirations. Aspirations and a future that embraced independence from Richard's wealth or reputation. That was the most wonderful legacy Richard could ever wish for. Seeing Cameron grow into someone who stands confidently on his own 2 feet. Feet guided by values that transcended money, Cameron ultimately found clarity. I received a call from someone interested in partnering with the foundation. They run a wonderful program for teenagers. Mothers, it could be a wonderful fit. Richard nodded with interest, showing his curiosity without being intrusive. I'm going to say yes. Cameron's eyes lit up for a second, just like they used to when he was a child talking about something exciting. I have a new idea or invention. I believe we can figure out the details, and I'm excited to see where this leads us. It seems like a great sign as he rubbed the paint stain on his arm, likely coming to a realization. Wasn't coming off easily, but there's still a lot of work ahead of me. Richard offered a small smile. I know. You do, and you'll manage it. Cameron returned the smile and then looked back at. The cafe sign is unusual, but being here gives me a sense of connection to Vanessa. Sometimes it feels like she's right there, ready to pour a cup of coffee. Richard felt a delightful memory surfaces, bringing to mind the image of Vanessa behind that counter, confidently unbothered by his arrogance and ready to speak her mind. He felt a sense of gratitude in a quiet way for what she had left behind for Cameron, for this place, for the sense of purpose that had shaped their lives. They shared a quiet moment, savoring their coffee together, and watched the day transition into evening. The sounds of the town gently softened as people made their way home for dinner. The glow from the overhead light cast their shadows on the porch's worn floorboards as Cameron let out a slow breath, feeling a sense of contentment. Thoughtful Richard glanced at him, noticing how much he had grown while still being so recognizable as a teenager. Had become a college graduate, and that same graduate was now a leader of something truly significant. Richard remembered Cameron's letter from years ago, the one that had flipped his life upside down, and realized how far they had come. When Cameron finally spoke again, his voice was just a soft whisper. Richard felt a smile spreading across his face, happy that he didn't just walk away. Rested a hand on the arm of Cameron's chair for a second. Me too. And with that, they settled into a warm silence as Cameron set his cup aside and folded his arms, leaning back as he gazed out at the street. Richard savored the last sip of his drink, letting the warmth soak in. He thought about the future, all the exciting possibilities stretching out in front of him. Cameron thought about the exciting possibilities of the new foundation and the potential for expansions in other cities. Whether Cameron would eventually embrace some support from him or continue to move forward independently, it would be a journey filled with possibilities. Since Richard was in control, Cameron had the freedom to carve out his own journey, and that was truly remarkable. The most wonderful gift Richard had given him, and it was one Cameron had certainly earned, was the light. Over the porch, as the sky began to dim, Cameron glanced at his surroundings with a sense of wonder. Watch, and Richard nodded, recognizing it was the perfect moment to wrap up for the day. Stood carrying the cups inside the beautifully renovated cafe, which smelled faintly of fresh paint and sawdust, yet there were delightful reminders of its old charm. Like some of the wooden tables Vanessa had chosen, remained refurbished to hold notebooks and brochures instead of pastries and plates. Cameron flicked off the lights. They arranged the papers neatly on a small desk by the door, stepped outside once more, and secured the lock with a sense of accomplishment, glancing up at the sign overhead. Casting a gentle shadow on the sidewalk, they paused on the sidewalk. Two of them side by side, Cameron with the keys in his hand, Richard with a hint of a smile playing on his lips. In that simple moment, everything felt perfectly in place. Cameron had transformed into someone who no longer needed to cling to anyone's sleeve and ask for a place to go. He was his own person, driven by memory and a bright future. Carrying Vanessa's spirit into the future, Richard felt only a sense of hope and possibility. An intriguing blend of pride and contentment that flowed deeper than he ever imagined when Cameron turned to him and asked if he wanted to grab dinner. Richard nodded enthusiastically, stepping forward to hail a passing car. They climbed inside together, ready for a delightful evening. Cameron eagerly shared the address of his favorite local diner with the driver as the car pulled away. Richard glanced back at the sign, O'Neill's Place, with a sense of hope and anticipation. Letters glowed in the fading light, a quiet beacon in a small Vermont town. He turned back to Cameron, feeling a sense of hope and warmth. Reflecting on the earlier question, Cameron was curious about whether Richard had any regrets about bringing him in. The answer was on his mind. Stayed unchanged. It was the best decision he had ever made, and he would always view it positively. If you enjoyed this story, please consider leaving a like. It truly supports the channel, and there's so much more to come. Heartwarming and emotional stories like this inspire you to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. I can't wait to hear your thoughts in the comments. Your reactions mean so much to me. Thanks for watching. I'm excited to see you in the next story.